Hello, and welcome to another session of What the. Today's topic of discussion is constitutional law versus federal law. What's the difference between constitutional law and federal law? In my opinion, constitutional law is all those circumstances that encompass civil rights and liberties with all of our freedoms intact. Federal law, well, that has the best interest of corporations and banks and the FBI and all that other stuff. So, how does constitutional law and federal law coexist with one another? Well, because of corporations. So corporations have created their human resources and they have to basically not disagree with constitutional law, and so they create equal opportunity employment under their corporation bylaws. And it's basically to protect their assets. So they can't get sued via rights and civil liberties being affected. And you've seen all these other circumstances where a person said they've had their rights violated at work and so on and so forth. And so that's what those human resource departments are responsible for. But it goes much deeper than this because of the corporations and their influence on the almighty dollar, and the dollar having all these rules associated with it. Does the dollar have rights? Well, the dollar is the United States dollar is the only currency accepted in every country in the world. So the dollar has a lot of power. And these corporations, well, they're all about the dollar. So, but the Constitution is all about the people. So when these corporations and the dollar and get involved with people, and what takes more precedent than the people and the corporation is the dollar, but the Constitution, it's all about the people. So how do these two conflict? Well, the Constitution states that it is illegal to go to jail for owing a debt. Basically, debtors' prisons are against the Constitution of the United States. It's illegal. Doesn't it? I mean, it's not just. So, but under federal law, the IRS exists. And the IRS, well, they collect taxes from people. So, if you owe the IRS money, you could go to jail for owing the IRS money, which is a debtor's institution. And that debtor's institution, well, constitutional law says it's illegal, but federal law says, well, we're going to create our own private prisons as well, which is against the Constitution as well. So you got all this federal law that's competing with constitutional law, which is the law of the land, and it's existed, and that was the founding principles of this country. And then you have federal law, and then you have a group that defends it, like the Federal Bureau of Investigation, that's all about federal law, and then they are currently going up against President Trump, who wants to make America great again because he's more concerned with the people. So, and getting people to work, and all these people, and getting jobs, and all these jobs, he's more concerned with the people, creating all these jobs, all kinds of jobs. But then the corporations, they don't want to pay the people, obviously, because they're more worried about the money. And then they can create their own controversy saying that, well, his jobs that he's creating, they don't pay that much because they're the ones that are responsible for the money being paid. So the whole back and forth thing is ridiculous, especially because looking at the IRS, that was a private corporation. created during President Roosevelt's term, and he was a president for 4 terms. Prior to the IRS, there was the Bureau of Internal Revenue, and that had existed since the early 1800s. So, when was the IRS created? Well, come to find out, there was a group of wealthy individuals that were heads of these mega corporations back in the day. And they wanted to hire a general named Smedley Butler to go into Washington, D.C. with 300,000 troops and overthrow Roosevelt. Well, Smedley Butler was a good general, and he was loyal to President Roosevelt. So he went into Washington, D.C., and he spoke with President Roosevelt and told him what was going on with these corporations. So then at that time, that is when the Internal Revenue and Audit Service was created. And so then you had these 2 competing entities, the Bureau of Internal Revenue, which had existed since the 1800s, and the Internal Revenue and Audit Service, which was created by these corporations. So Roosevelt knew all these details about these corporations and these millionaires or billionaires at that time and what they were doing and so on. And we know that, well, prohibition existed, and same with making marijuana Schedule I narcotic, and these corporations were responsible for that because they had competing businesses that are going against, well, alcohol. Petroleum was going against alcohol because Henry Ford had created ethanol for all of his Model Ts, so they made alcohol illegal, so everybody had to use petroleum. And then, of course, you had marijuana, which was an industrialized product, and they're making clothing out of it, but it was going against the cotton market. And so the cotton market were like, oh, because they just created the cotton gin, and they're like, now we can revolutionize the cotton industry, and we don't want marijuana coming around and taking over our profits. And so then they made marijuana Schedule I narcotic. So, because of those circumstances, you got these 2 competing entities. Roosevelt knew about all these guys, and he tried to create solutions that would counter those things. And to counter the corporations, he wanted to institute a second Bill of Rights, which was in the best interest of the workers. And those workers would have more power than the CEOs. They could actually vote out the CEO of the company and vote in whoever they wanted to. So the second Bill of Rights gave people those opportunities. But unfortunately, Roosevelt passed away before it could be enacted in the United States. And now these corporations, obviously, they have these things called, right to work states and all this other nonsense where they've corrupted, obviously, the states' constitutions, but that's another story regarding state constitution, regarding the United States Constitution and so on. So, because of these entities existing, well, there is one company that has adopted the second Bill of Rights. That is Toyota Motor Company in Japan, and they have adopted the second Bill of Rights, and the workers do have the right to vote against or vote out the CEO. So yeah, it does work, and obviously Toyota Motor Company is one of the best companies in the world as far as automakers. So anyway, so let's keep in mind, constitutional law is the law of the land, and you should ask, do you agree with the Constitution being the law of the land? And if they're all about that federal law nonsense, and they're like, and they say no, the Constitution isn't the law of the land, start looking at those corporations and start figuring out who are they, where are they not agreeing with, if they're in the United States, or not agreeing with the Constitution. Really start to look at those corporations and figure out, are they in our best interest as far as consumers? Do we want their products? Could we find a better company that is possibly for the Constitution of the United States and not for the federal law or whatever it might be? So, anyway, this has been another session of What the